October the 25th to order. And so we'll just start off with citizen concerns. And hearing none, approval of the minutes from the September 27th. Are there any objections? No objections?
Nope.
Approved. And moving on to item number 5, presentation of the current fire operations, which is and just as to remind everybody, this 2 months ago, there was a great presentation made by the firefighters, and so we created a series of questions and asked the administration to respond with their thoughts and ideas relative to that presentation. So, and I'm not sure who will.
I was going to start off and then turn it over to Deputy Chief Granata. But before I start the long-winded presentation, I'm going to hand out two different documents. One is a narrative that I'm going to try my best to summarize it in an executive fashion. I know you can all read and comprehend. And then the document behind it is a series of charts, some of which you may recall from this past spring when one of our volunteer firefighters, Joe Fraley, came in and gave a presentation to this committee. And then after I'm done kind of hopefully summarizing, hopefully I won't read it verbatim, then we have a slide packet that Deputy Chief Granata is going to go through, as well as a document that has a description of the slide that you'll be seeing. So some of these in the slide packet are all in that document that you have in front of you, but you're going to get a second copy of that with some descriptions, and then you can use this to write on, take notes if you'd like. So that's what we were going to tackle tonight, and then we're certainly happy to answer what questions we can from City Council, those that we can't, or that may be policy questions, decisions. We'll certainly write those down, go back and discuss them with our policy maker, the mayor.
We'll have the firefighters receive a copy of this, what we're seeing here today.
I just passed it up, but I do have a couple extra copies if somebody would like them.
Okay. Yeah.
I got a couple here.
Keep it on
For the president and past president. Oh, and I do have an extra, so we have one. Thank you. Kevin, same to you. Fred, you're good?
I'm good. Oh, my voice good.
Pleasant. Yeah. The language will wonderful. Give her credit for that. I'll just start off, and then if I feel like I'm getting long-winded, I'm just going to stop myself, and I'll turn it over to Deputy Chief Granata. But part of our job, I think, after that presentation was going back and taking some of the comments, statements, slides, documentation that Mr. Hickerson provided at the time, and either adding additional information, giving a different perspective, discussing why we're doing what we're doing, the way we're doing it. So kind of addressing, as Councilman Van Hoosen said, some of those questions, thoughts, concerns that were voiced in that document. And then we also tried to add, maybe more so for myself than others, some of the background and history on the staffing. And as I mentioned before this committee meeting, it was interesting to say the least, because I've only been here 10 years and I have anecdotally heard bits and pieces. But Deputy Chief Granata, along with documentation that we had from Chief Ruiz and conversations that I even had with Chief Klein, helped us to kind of create somewhat of a chronological timeline, if you will, that I think is good, just even historically, anecdotally, so we have it somewhere sitting in a file, so people in the future can kind of keep building on that history and that knowledge. So that was very educational for me. Like I said, I'll try not to read through it verbatim, but I'll start out by saying that we all recognize and understand that our population's grown, our boundaries have grown. Back in 2001, I think we were just shy of 17,000 population. Today, we're just over 25,000. Our square miles, I did do the calculations, have increased due to annexations over time. So we do recognize that, and that's why we tasked the fire administration with evaluating the data that they can collect from their reporting systems, looking at those operations, looking at them holistically, and making modifications on how that division operates based on the analysis of that data. We haven't always had that data available in formats that were readily available, But we started gathering that information back when we were looking at a second station, and we were trying to convince ourselves and city council that it was the right time to make that move. And at that time, we had a GIS software specialist, Ian Dunn, who helped us put that information together. But since that point in time, the fire division does have those tools in-house with utilizing their ESO reporting system where they put in all their I'm going to get this wrong, WG, so feel free to correct me. Not necessarily the CAD information, but the information off of their reports that they have to do for NIFRS. So that's allowed, in this particular case, some of our volunteer firefighters, as well as Deputy Chief Granata, to drill down into that information in different ways, different manners. So that tool that's available to us, that's what we're using now, and that's what we're going to continue to use until new tools come out or additional tools come out to keep evaluating that information and making our operational decisions based on that data. That's how we're operating today. That's how we want to operate into the future. Unless situations change, and then if other factors come into play, we need to analyze and consider those as well. But that said, we wanted to speak to you a little bit about the staffing I mentioned. And we went back as far as 2001. I don't know if that was because it was the last year good information was readily available. But back then, we had roughly 18 full-time staff members. And part of that 18 was I believe a chief, a deputy chief, and a fire inspector / fire marshal. And so at that time, we had five assigned per shift with a 4-man minimum. And there was also 3 on-call employees. And I think Mr. Nickerson spoke to some of the on-call employees that used to be there during his presentation. And so we wanted to know when a call came in, that 3 of the on-duty firefighters on that shift, they would respond to that EMS call and a medic. The 4th person used to stay back at the station, so they waited for the 3 on-call people to come in. They would grab the next apparatus, head out to that call, head out to that scene. One of the challenges with on-call people is that sometimes it would take them 10 minutes to get up to the station, get their gear, get in an apparatus before they headed out. And we've had on-call people at least since 2001, and I think that ended somewhere around the 2016, 2015 timeframe. And over time, it went from 3 on-call to 2 on-call, and you'll be able to see that in the narrative. But there was a challenge with that on-call component because it wasn't that immediate response that we can give today, even with having 2 stations and having staff digging between those 2 stations. In certain instances, in certain call types, everybody's able to respond instantaneously, and we can still have, at a minimum, 7 people respond to a call, depending on that type of call. So we still have that flexibility today, but they're with full-time staff, not on-call staff. They're immediately available versus waiting somewhere up to 10 minutes for that person to get to the station. As I said, get in here, get on an apparatus, and head out to the scene. Fast forwarding, back in 2007, Chief Klein at the time changed the deployment of personnel and equipment. What he went and did, based on whatever information he had at the time, was to take that EMS call and put 2 people on a medic, 2 people on an engine, leaving nobody back at the station at that time. But then he would have 3 on-call employees coming in and waiting. I don't know if they immediately responded to that same call, Deputy Chief Granata, or if they kind of waited in case a second call came in. I should have asked you that earlier, but it just occurred to me.
A couple things that straighten you out.
Thank you.
When you were talking about the on-call people at the beginning, for a medic call or EMS call, the 3 people from the station would go and leave and go on a call. The other 3 people came back and staffed the station. They did not respond to that call unless it was a multiple injury call or something like that, where they're coming back in to supplement that call. But most EMS calls were handled by the 3 people that left the station, and 3 people from home were coming back and backfilling, so we had 4 people at the station. If a second call came in, they would then respond. So a little bit of correction there. So
I'm not the expert, that's right.
So same with the people that we have coming in for immediate call. We had 2 calls back to back or within a minute of each other. We still had to wait for those people from home to drive into the station and then respond from the station to the call.
And I think you mentioned that at some points, by the time an on-call person came in, if another call came in, they got to the station, geared up, went out, got to the scene, it could be upwards of 20 minutes.
The on-call people had up to 10 minutes to respond. That's been in place since I started back in 2001. As the city grew further and more dense, some of those people were having trouble making it to the station in those 10 minutes because of traffic, more people on the road. So, you know, it was sometimes 10, 12 minutes. And if they would turn around and go to a response to St. Clair Commons from up here at 3 o'clock in the afternoon before the diverging diamond was in place, you know, that could be almost a 12-minute response time as well. Hence the reason for the location of the second station.
So then after 2007, during like the next 10 years, we saw various levels of staffing. Sometimes there were 6-man minimums, then 5-man minimums, back to 6-man minimums, based on the circumstances at the time. And what we noted, given our research, is that, you know, sometimes that staffing developed because there was people on medical leaves for extended medical leaves, and it just wasn't practical or feasible. Sometimes it was operational changes. Sometimes it was due to the overextension of fire division's overtime budget and the response that the fire division would receive from city council during budget meetings or city council meetings regarding the overtime budget and the fire division. So there was a variety of reasons during that last 10 years after 2007 why the staffing fluctuated. But at no time did the fire administration, or I think administration at the time, at least as far as I was here, ever feel that there was the safety of residents or citizens was being compromised. Still receive the same quality service and care, whether it be an EMS call or the same quality attention, or it be a fire call or a structured fire. Towards the end of this time period, though, the chief, as Deputy Chief mentioned, Chief Klein was having a hard time filling those on-call slots. And it was for a variety of reasons. The on-call had to be filled with somebody who lived inside the city or could respond within 10 minutes to the station. And what we were finding is that there was more people living outside the city than inside the city. And there were firefighters who chose just not to sign up for on-call because of life. You know, children, and as we all know nowadays, children have more opportunities to have a variety of events in their lives versus when I was growing up. There wasn't all the travel soccer, the baseball, softball, et cetera, et cetera. So many families nowadays choose not to take that on-call time. They chose to go out and be with their children, be with their family, and do activities. So because of that, and finding that being difficult, we were having weekend slots that were left open. There were some evening slots that were left open. And during that time period, we were transitioning then to having Chief Ruiz become our deputy chief, I believe at the time, in 2016. And he took us down the path of convincing fire administration and the mayor at the time to apply for a grant, and we were awarded that grant to hire 3 new additional firefighters. So this increased at that time in 2016, 2017, our staffing to 8 per shift with a minimum of 6 persons on duty. So while that was going on, he was also looking at that on-call practice that I mentioned in its totality and the amount of overtime it cost the city and its taxpayers. And he felt that it was not an effective practice and that we needed to change the way we operate, especially if we're going to build that second station. Because he came from a world where he had operated out of multiple stations, whereas we internally had not had that opportunity. So the on-call practice actually ceased somewhere around mid-2017. And the beginning of 2018, after Chief Ruiz determined it would be more effective to utilize the on-call overtime funds and ask for additional dollars through the budget process, he asked to hire 3 new additional officers. And that was granted by City Council. And that took our staffing up to the 9 per shift that it is today, with 7 man minimum on duty. And so this also put us in a position we felt at the time to be able to respond out of 2 separate stations when that station was going to be open and ready for operations. So also during 2017, 2018 timeframe, Chief Ruiz instituted a part-time firefighter program. And the goal there was to get additional sets of hands on shifts in order to reduce the need for overtime and just provide those additional set of hands during certain circumstances. And as many of you know, many of the firefighter paramedics that even we have and that others have what they call a B job. They're doing some other work, whether it be at a retail outlet or if they're doing part-time work for another firefighting company. And so we were getting many of our part-time folks from that B job action. But at the end of the day, in the long run, the outcomes weren't as favorable as we all hoped. And it was for a variety of reasons, whether it be some of those part-time firefighters that we had at the time, I think, got full-time jobs elsewhere, even with us, I think, in at least one instance. So our pool kind of shrank. We weren't seeing an increase in applications coming in to become a part-time firefighter for the city. We also saw, interestingly enough, there were many times, and we're trying to kind of document this in a spreadsheet format, that sometimes, I don't say many times, but there are times that we can map out when that additional set of hands signed up for a shift, whether it be a 12-hour shift, 24-hour shift, where we would find that there would be our full-time firefighter paramedics would see that a part-timer had signed up, and they in turn would sign off for a shift. They would take vacation or comp. So we weren't always seeing it being as an additional set of hands. Sometimes it was just evening out the sets of hands that were already there, because people would take off on vacation and comp that they had earned. So it hasn't been the success that we were hoping for. We still have some part-timers. I think we have about 5 maybe part-time folks.
We have 7, of which only 2 actually participate on a regular basis more than 2 24-hour shifts a month. The rest of them are maybe a 12-hour shift or 2 12-hour shifts, 1 24-hour shift. That's pretty much it.
So the success that we were hoping for just hasn't panned out, at least as of this time. But back to the narrative. So then when the second station, Station 39, opened in February of 2019, Chief Ruiz, Deputy Chief Granata had worked with our GIS specialist, Ian, who was still here at the time, to create those geographic districts based upon the call volumes, the location of the calls. And some of you may recall that there was kind of heat maps that showed us our hot spots, showed us the trends of where the calls were going. And so they used those to create the districts, both 39 and District 38. And it was decided that District 39, the new station, would have 5 of the 9 staff members assigned to that facility, 4 assigned to Station 38, and there would be a minimum of 4 at Station 39 and 3 at Station 38. And if we actually had more than the 7-man minimum, then that 8th person would actually go to Station 38 to make that a 4-person shift minimum versus a 3 minimum it would normally have been under. So since we've had those 2 stations, we're still going through a learning curve, I guess I would say, Deputy Chief. Since we haven't operated in that fashion, over the last couple years, there's been tweaks, modifications, changes to how we run, as would be expected. But I will say that the expectations had always been, by both the chiefs, myself, and the mayor, is that we would not just totally duplicate the operations that was happening at Station 38 or the single station at the time, but that we were going to reallocate resources, be they human and or equipment, to be better in terms of providing response times, be efficient, get our first responders out there as quickly as we could to that address of the call, knowing that if we needed additional help, it was a phone call away. And I think we've been pretty successful at that up to date. And I'm sure there's going to be modifications and tweaks coming in the future. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But as I mentioned, we've made changes since it opened. We're going to continue to make changes based on what the data is telling us and change our operational plans accordingly. What we did want to also mention is that when Mr. Hickinson was giving his presentation, he mentioned that the city should hire 6 additional firefighter EMTs. And this was very surprising to us, because that would be a change in position for the IAFF. because they were adamantly opposed to that in the last round of negotiations. We went so far as to propose that EMTs could just respond to EMS calls, even just driving the apparatus to the call and or doing transports instead of a firefighter paramedic. And the proposal was clearly rejected, and it was rejected on the grounds that the inferior skill set that the EMT had could impact patient care. So we appreciate their willingness to reconsider this idea, this proposal, this notion. But since it's a bargain for term at this point in time, we'll be happy to discuss it at the next round of collective bargaining negotiations, which I believe starts in the next year sometime, if I'm not mistaken. Sometime I think in the third quarter of 23.
At the third quarter of 23, and at January 1 of 24.
So we'll be there before we know it. But then anecdotally, we did want to mention that in conversations and in reviewing other organizations, Bowling Green, Toledo, Perrysburg Township, Maumee, Springfield, Monclova, all use a mix of paramedics and EMTs on their roads. So again, today we have 30 full-time employees, let me take that back, several part-time, as the Deputy Chief mentioned, and we still have a couple of those part-paid and/or volunteer firefighters. And that compares us in 2001 where we had 18 full-time employees and roughly 28 volunteer or part-paid at the time, not part-time. Just to not confuse you, because I still get confused with that. And then we wanted to talk about the quality of patient care on calls. So during that presentation, it was suggested that residents and businesses east of State Route 25 are receiving less services than residents and businesses on the west side of 25. Well, there may be different staffing levels at each of these stations. That does not lead to unequal or inadequate treatment of patients. You know, as we stated before during this presentation, other conversations, if a call comes in and it's an elevated call in terms of its acuteness, the officer in charge has the ability to upgrade that call right then and there and send more crews. And the crew that's on that initial first response has the ability to call for additional help and backup. That's always an option, and that does take place and happen today. So we're really no different than our other jurisdictions. In particular with City of Toledo, that is exactly what they do. That's exactly what Maumee does. When we talk to Perrysburg Township, when we talk to Sylvania Township, they've all acknowledged they do send an initial crew, and then if needed, additional staff follow that call at the request of the crew members. We did want to acknowledge that we certainly agree with Mr. Nickerson regarding our equipment. We have excellent equipment. It's up-to-date equipment. We have the Lucas devices, which provide those chest compressions. It certainly lessens the stress and the physical exertion that a firefighter would experience during those events. We have new heart monitors that came in, I believe, the beginning of this year, deployed this year. They provide a lot of good information and take different duties away from the firefighters, give them the ability to do other items. Our power cots help a lot, is my understanding, with lifting folks, with manpower, getting people in and out of facilities. It's less strenuous, we see less injuries. But along with all those improvements, those advances, it also makes it difficult to compare staffing from one year to the next and run levels from one period to another time period, because we didn't have those devices just a few short years ago, and now we have them. So we want to be cognizant of that. But what we do know, and I think we all appreciate, is we have great service. Our staff members provide excellent service to the residents and visitors who need their services. And we're going to continue to look at the best and most efficient ways to provide that service so that we can maintain that level of service in the long run and make sure it's sustainable. Because without that sustainability, we could be in trouble one day. I mean, as we talked during our initial budget conversations and budget letters that the mayor put out, this was the first year since I've been here that we really struggled with putting together a balanced budget. As we're growing, our staff is growing, payroll continues to grow, fridges continue to grow, And as our equipment ages out, we need to replace it. As our buildings age out, we need to make repairs, improvements, renovations, new facilities, whatever the case may be. So we have to be cognizant of that. We also wanted to focus in on cardiac arrest. There was a lot of time devoted to that. And, obviously that, when that call comes in, the response time is critical, for those patients, for those people who are undergoing that particular stress. That is why we want to make sure that the officer on duty and or the crews know that they can elevate that call at the onset of that call when the dispatch call comes in, and during the call they can call for additional personnel to assist them. We're not any different again as any of our neighboring suburbs. So one of the things that hit home with me was when Chief Armstrong from Toledo sat with us, and she emphasized in our conversations the fact that to her most of the cardiac saves occur because of good chest compressions and good ventilations. She says that's what saves lives most of the time. She indicated that it's not necessarily the number of people you have on hand, but those two items are the most critical. If you do them right and you do them well, you're going to have a lot of good outcomes. So that was a big takeaway for myself. She was very emphatic about that. But then as you go on, and as Deputy Chief will point out, you'll note that in 2020, of our 2,600 calls, 22 of those were categorized as cardiac arrests. That's 0.84% of all the calls that year. For 2021, it was 0.7% of all of our calls for that year. And for 2022, at least through August, it was 0.55% of all of our total calls. Even though we understand the importance of those calls, and we appreciate that, we respect that, but again, we have to look at the operations holistically. We cannot just always look at that one catastrophic event. We just have to be cognizant of that to make sure that we have a sustainable program and we can provide services to all of our residents in the event of multiple calls coming in. So as I mentioned, we've manipulated our response to EMS calls over time in regards to staffing. We have a second station, and we're going to continue to do so today and into the future, as long as we're working under Mayor Mackin, I'll say, at the very least. We're going to continue to do that because he is very emphatic about improving the operations and efficiency of not just the fire division, but all of our departments. That's something that he has been emphatic about. One of them was our finance system, and Amber can attest to that, the number of calls and times we've been asked, when are we getting rid of this, when are we getting rid of that, when are we going to be more efficient? And we've achieved that, and we're achieving those savings, efficiencies, and that sustainability there, as well as over at the fire division currently. Some of the other things that we wanted to focus on is what our neighbors are doing. It was mentioned what some of our neighbors are doing. So we went back and did some research regarding Bowling Green, Sylvania Township, Harrisburg Township, Maumee, Toledo. And in the document that I provided you, you can see way more details on those conversations, interviews, research. But one of our big takeaways is that we're not the minority in how we're operating. We're not the minority in looking at the data that we can achieve through our reporting systems, analyzing that data, responding to that data, changing our operational plans. Anecdotally, Bowling Green is twice the size of us, at least 3/4 of the year. I've learned that they only have one automatic aid partner, and it's for fires only, and that's Middleton Township. And or Central Joint, depending on what side of Worcester I think the call comes in. So they're a little different from us. They do have 51 employees. They use a mix of firefighter, paramedics, firefighter EMTs. And we noted that, with the discussion that Mr. Hickerson had regarding EMTs, that's encouraging, that's positive. We'd certainly like to explore that more when we go into collective bargaining next year. Sylvania Township is a little bit different. They take care of not only Sylvania Township, but the city of Sylvania. They operate out of 4 stations with a minimum of 17 per shift. They also have Lucas County Life Squad. That's part of their, that's assigned to their jurisdiction. Although that squad can obviously go outside of their jurisdiction if another jurisdiction needs that particular ALS unit. But depending on the district that the call comes into, their response is either a 3-person medic or a 4-person engine for most of their basic calls. And if an acute call comes in, they'll also send the ALS unit over that's assigned to them from Lucas County. So that does ramp up the staffing on hand from anywhere from 5 to 6, possibly 7. So their operation is a little bit more similar to Perrysburg's because they're operating out of not just 2 stations, but multiple stations. Perrysburg Township, it was a good conversation I had with Chief Bryce. They're roughly a population of 13,000. They have 7 firefighter paramedics and/or EMTs assigned per shift with a 6-person minimum. He indicated that on 90% of their EMS calls, which is he dubs his standard calls, their response is to send 2 people on a medic and their captain in a chase vehicle. And if it's an acute call that comes in, unconscious person, stroke, possible cardiac arrest, no cardiac arrest, instead of sending the captain in the vehicle, they send the captain and an additional staff person in that vehicle to that particular call. So they have 4 on hand for that call. He felt that his 3 firefighter paramedics or EMTs, when they're on scene, they are capable of clearing airways and putting the Lucas device on that cardiac arrest patient, giving them the best possible odds of success. And then if backup is needed or has been called for, when that backup comes, they assist with meds, IVs. They also assist with putting the Lucas device on that individual if that hasn't already been done prior to their arrival. So he was very proud of the work that his paramedics do and EMTs over at their station. We also talked to Mooney. They're a little bit different than us, as everybody's a little bit different than everybody else. They're a mix of full-time paramedics and on-call EMTs and paramedics. They also have an ALS unit from Lucas County that's assigned to them. And that's staffed with 2 members there. They indicated that on a basic life support call, the staffing response is 2. If a call comes in and it's known to be a suspected cardiac arrest or unconscious person, they send the ALS unit if it's available, which is staffed with 3 paramedics over there, I believe, at a minimum of 2. And the BLS unit will also go, as well as a chief and deputy chief, if they're in the office, they'll also respond to that call. City of Toledo, I don't know how Chief Armstrong does it, but she's dealing with 18 stations, 580 firefighter paramedics or EMTs. She said they're split about 50-50. Lucas County assigns them 6 of the life squads over there. And she says when an ALS call comes in, and they determine it as unconscious person, cardiac arrest, stroke, something of that acute nature, that she sends 1 ALS unit, responds with 2 people, and 1 additional unit, which has a minimum of 3 people on it, responds from the station where the call came into. Not every station of the 18 stations has a medic unit assigned to it. Some have medics and engines, some have an engine, a ladder, and heavy rescue. So whatever is the most appropriate second response unit is what's sent. She also mentioned during our conversations with her a couple weeks ago that she also is looking to try and be more efficient with the allocation of resources to each incident, and she's looking at the data, and she's letting that data drive her decision-making and changes to her response plans. So in general, we just don't think that using any one metric or best practice out there is the best way to go. We need to look at what's best for Perrysburg. We need to look at cities our size if we want to do comparables. We should look at the calls, the type of calls, the locations that the calls are coming in, the frequency from those locations that the calls are coming in, to keep looking at that data to drive how we need to change our operational plans to best suits the city, its residents, its visitors, and to suit the sustainability of that operation, of that model, while wisely using our tax dollars. And last but not least, sorry I told you I was going to bore you to death, but we thought this was important information, and it was quite a bit of learning for myself, is structure fires. I just want to note, when a structure fire comes in to Perrysburg, we have our automatic aid partners, but if a call comes in from anywhere, we are going to send all of our units are going to go. We're going to call in everybody that's off duty. Our automatic aid partners are coming, and we're going to do the best we can with all that staffing that's on hand. And we're going to be successful at times, and there's going to be times where circumstances are beyond our control, and we may not be able to save that structure. But we do bring the house. We always have, and we always will. And there's nothing wrong with using your automatic and mutual aid partners. That's why everybody has them. When I was talking with Chief over at Sylvania Township, I think he says on a weekly basis they have 5 mutual aid calls where they're requesting assistance because they have multiple calls, back-to-back calls. And he's like, there's nothing wrong with that until that number gets, I'll say, out of control or out of hand. He's not looking at changing his operational model. So he's just like, you just got to keep looking at the data and have that help you make those decisions on how you respond to different types of calls. And with that said, me, Deputy Chief, and at the time the Fire Chief, and Mayor will just continue doing these analysis of the data as we collect them. We're going to look at the data. We're going to look at data specific to us. We're going to look how to be operationally efficient, effective. We're going to look at how we can maintain that service at the highest level, using the tax dollars wisely. We're already focusing in on a couple areas where we're going to be doing a little bit deeper dive, and it's going to be items such as we tend to travel to about 10 different facilities. They all fall within that nursing, senior, 55-plus communities, and we need to look at those calls and see if those calls are actually emergency calls. If they're not emergency calls, we need to take a look at those and ask ourselves if we should be transporting non-emergency or critical patients to the hospital, if that's something for a private ambulance company to tackle. You know, are we being looked at as a taxi cab by some of these facilities? So we're going to explore that, because of the 6,200 EMS calls we've got in the last 3 years, over a third of those calls are coming from 10 facilities. That's an incredible amount of calls. So we're going to dive into that data and look at that and see what that tells us. We're also going to work with Chief Jones over there on EMDs, medical emergency dispatchers. If we can get our folks trained to be EMDs, that will give us a different level of dispatching, which will then allow the fire administration to more finely tune in what our response should be to a given situation now that we have more critical information at our disposal. So that's something we want to continue to explore. We're also going to keep looking at our peak call times and look at our future needs to kind of zero in on where the peak volumes of calls are coming consistently and how we can address those. And we also want to look at the frequency of those multiple calls to know how often we're getting not just the back-to-back, but adding that fourth call, and how we're going to go about handling those, given the other information that we're looking at as well. So we just want to assure this committee that we're going to keep driving ourselves to look at the data to make those decisions instead of, I think, and I feel. We want to be able to come to the mayor with hard data and allow him to be able to come through the budgeting process, making those requests with hard data to city council. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Chief Granata. And I'm just going to hand out, these are the specific slides. And again, the top page just has a little bit of a description on it. So when you take these away and want to refer back to them, that may give you an indication of what the slides tell you. And I do have some extras if Chris or anybody wants one.
All right, I believe that you guys should have these in front of you, or if not, we can look at the screen. These slides, again, go back to the data that you saw partly back in April with Joe Froelich when he did that presentation, and the same information that Mr. Rickerson used for his demonstration. I have to give credit to Joe Froelich. The ability for him to drill down into some of this data has been tremendous. He would show me some of the data, and I would say, this chart is great, but could you do this to it? And I don't know if I can do that. And usually by the next day, hey, I figured that out, I have this data. So being able to drill down on this data has driven a lot of what we've done for you here today and continue to do as we move forward. So as we look at slide number 1, this slide shows a breakdown of all the calls by month over a 3-year period. 2022 data has been incorporated through September 5th, so it's not a complete year. So this year is a little short. As we look at some of this data, we are using years 2020, 2021, and 2022. And all of 2022's data is through September 5th. Highlighted on this slide are the 25 structure fires over a 3-year period, and almost 6,000 EMS calls during that same period. And you see, as we have this chart broken out, we spread out for our section 1 of our codes for structure fires, and we actually break it down even further, so the type of fires that we actually have. And then the same for EMS. As you go down to section 3, it breaks it down even further than just plain EMS. We can break it down by category. This next slide is distinct calls per year to specific high call occupancies. As the city administrator pointed out, we have a select view of high call volume places that we go to on a regular basis. And these 4 areas highlighted have a large occupancy and create a high demand for the services, including EMS and fire. And whether it's a senior living complex or a 55-plus community, school, they're broken down to that. You can see the big spike that we have over all 3 years at those communities, calling for a larger demand of service. Slide number 3 shows city calls per year by district. As she had pointed out, we had separated our districts into District 38, which incorporates the old station, and District 39, which is the southern end west of 25 and incorporates the new station. In 2019, when we opened the second station to improve response times, we created 2 separate response districts based on response times, travel distance, anticipated traffic hurdles. District 38 encompasses the old fire station, most of downtown, areas within the boundary streets, and the eastern side of town. While District 39 encompasses the new station, including areas west of 25, south of Echo Junction Road, to include areas south of 5 Points. With District 38 being long well established, we knew that these stations would receive more calls, but as you can see, the disparity between the number of calls between districts is reducing as District 39 continues to develop. So as we look at the first set of bars, it was quite a distinct variation. There's almost 700 more calls in District 38 than there was in District 39. And as we get towards the end, the last 2 bars, we see that disparity is only about 300 calls disparity as District 39 continues to grow. Slide number 4, these are all the city calls over a 3-year period. This chart breaks down the number of total calls by hour of the day over the last 3 years. We trend higher between the hours of 9 a.m. and 6 p.m., falling off as we move towards the evening hours, then overnight. So starting at midnight, you see the lower call numbers. This is over a 3-year period, and then we tend to spike as we hit 7, 8, then 9 o'clock, and then spike up at noon. This chart here shows all the city calls over a 3-year period. So this chart breaks down the number of calls by hour of the day and 3 years, and the trend higher between the hours of 9 and 6. And these EMS calls, this chart shows the volumes of EMS calls over the last 3 years. 2020 was an anomaly with COVID-19, and 2022 is through September 5th. With average around 200 EMS calls per year, we can see that this number is trending slightly higher. Slide number 6. This is city EMS calls by hour. This chart shows the high call volume of EMS calls over the last 3 years by hour of the day. It is very reflective of the previous slide showing all the city calls by hour of the day. This is due to the larger number of EMS calls versus the low number of non-EMS calls. So this is very reflective of the slide 2 slides ago. Slide number 7, city calls per year by patient chief complaint. Highlighted in this chart of city EMS calls within the total EMS call volume over the over the 6,200 EMS calls. Only 52 of these were categorized as cardiac arrest. Of these, only 26 of these patients were transported to the hospital. Slide number 8, city calls per month at senior living facilities over the last 3-year period. This slide shows the number of calls that we respond to by month over the last 3 years. Clearly, more than 1/3 of our EMS calls are to these select 11 facilities. Slide number 9, distinct city calls by category, excluding EMS. This chart shows the number of non-EMS calls that we respond to by year. This includes fires, technical rescue, service calls, and false alarms. False alarms are a small number in this category, but encompasses calls that include unintentional activation of calls, whether from smoke from cooking or steam from a shower activates an alarm. The system is working as designed to alert occupants versus someone who's actually pulling alarm box with ill intentions. Slide number 10, city calls by category and district per year. This chart shows all the city calls per category by year. The calls by district are leveling out as in the Southern District becomes more developed. So as you break that down, we have District 38 and District 39 in year 20. The next set of bars is 21, and the last set is 22. As we can see, the 1668 versus 951 in 2020, and as we get towards District 38, 39 in 2022, it's 1147 to 848. So that number is shrinking in disparity. Sorry, this is small. Slide 11, percentage of call types by category over a 3-year period. This chart breaks down the type of percentages with 83.71% of the calls for service being EMS, with all fires being ranked at 0.74%. And the last slide we have here is our general alarm calls by category. For us, a general alarm call is when we are all calling our off-duty, our part-paid, and our part-time personnel. This happens when we have exceeded our needed capacity for personnel. So for a structured fire, we automatically call in anybody who's off-duty, the part-timers, along with our mutual aid and automatic aid partners. And that's the last slide I have.
So as I mentioned, we're happy to try and answer questions you may have now. Some questions we may not be able to answer right at this moment. We'll have to go back and have conversations on. We're happy to continue to provide feedback. Happy to continue to provide this committee maybe periodically with like an update in documents as we get towards the end of the year. We're happy to run a complete set for comparison purposes and keep this committee up to date. We're going to keep analyzing the data, keep modifying our operational responses, and as I said, we're happy to address any questions that we can.
Towards the end of your narrative, you were mentioning about transport, how the percentage of our calls that we just end up just doing transports, right?
What we were referring to is actually, the chief could not get a slide. It's probably the fourth from the back. Yeah, fourth from the back. So these 2,300 calls to these particular addresses, that's over a third of all of our EMS calls in the last 3 years. So we're taking a look at these calls, a deeper look at these calls to see what those calls were. Were they emergencies? Was it somebody who's been ill for 3 days and the doctor decided, hey, maybe they should go to the hospital, but they're not exhibiting, they're not in distress, they're not exhibiting any acute symptoms?
Anything emergency, we need emergency transport. They just need transportation.
Transport service could take
Correct. So
care of
we're looking at this because this potentially, even if a third of these calls are non-emergency calls, that's still taking our paramedics out of service
My
17
question,
or 700 times
okay.
in the course of a 3-year
My
period.
question was, you did a lot of checking with the surrounding communities. Do any of them, have they eliminated the transport component and
Yes.
gone to private transport?
Yes,
Toledo does transport.
Toledo, obviously they're much larger than we are. Population's like 270,000. They have units internal to themselves. If it's an ALS call, it's an acute call, that two-person life squad is going to go to the scene, do their business, and they'll transport to the hospital. But they also have BLS medics, and they have transport units. They're to the point where if it's not an emergency issue, if it's not life-threatening, if it's someone who's been checked out by the paramedics or the EMTs, and it's not acute, they're literally telling them that they are not going to transport them. They have options though. Have a family member, have a friend, call a cab. I think they actually give a list of cab companies, but they do have a program in place with
They
Wisconsin
do.
Job and Family Services.
They received a federal grant and they implement that. They can actually call a cab for, low-income people that cannot provide transportation. So in lieu of transporting themselves with a ALS or BLS transport unit, they will actually call a cab and they fund that through a federal grant.
I think Sylvania
Just
Township.
refresh my memory. ALS, BLS,
Advanced life support, basic life support.
okay, advanced and basic.
And I think Sylvania Township also does
Savannah
that.
Township does have a policy in place approved by Lucas County EMS that if they're called to a skilled nursing facility and it's not an emergency transport, they will not transport them, they will leave them there. And that's
And right now, our policy is we transport all.
Yes.
currently, yes.
So Deputy Chief Bernard is actually currently getting a meeting together to bring in these facilities and their administrators and private transport carriers to kind of bring everybody together, talk about the issue, talk about how they can utilize these services in non-emergency situations versus calling 911, calling us. And so we're going to start having those conversations and we'll see what develops, but it's something that we think we need to do because our folks should be going out of service on a non-emergency call, but potentially an emergency call is going to come in. And we're now out of service and we're down in Toledo, we're over in Maumee, transporting a non-emergency patient.
But in our collective bargaining agreement, it's our staff that does all the transporting, correct?
It's not due to collective bargaining agreement. We are an emergency transport service, so we get into issues with our billing and Medicare because if it's not an emergency service, which we are listed as, it becomes an issue with us why we're transporting a non-emergency patient when we fall under the transport service. So there's a difference, a disparity in what qualifies us.
So it's an operational decision versus a collective bargaining decision.
And we're getting paid for those transports.
Not if they're not an emergency transport.
We're having difficulties with some of these. Most of these we are getting the funds collected, but we get questioned through our billing company why this patient is transported. They have to fill out a physician certification statement saying this the physician requested a 911 transport versus a non-emergency transport unit, and they are not providing that for us.
Are you saying if our EMSs in the field decide they need to be transported, and then there's a doctor down the line that says they never needed to be transported here?
No, just the opposite. A lot of these skilled nursing facilities have physicians that float between many facilities, and they could say, yeah, let's take Mrs. Jones to the, no offense, Mrs. Jones to the hospital, let's send her out. I want her sent out. Well, instead of calling a transport service for this non-emergency transport, they will call 911. And many of these facilities, because, as I remember, Pope says, we are dependable and reliable, so they call us because sometimes these transport services can be anywhere from 4, 6, even 8 hours because of the number of calls and assignments that they have. And they don't want to wait that long before they transport somebody.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
And correct me if I'm wrong, it's under $400 a trip that we're charging.
we're charging $425 for a resident and $425 for a resident, $450 for a non-resident plus mileage.
One statistic I would like to see that's not in here is how many times we have requested mutual aid average per year, per month, over the last 3-4 years, and how many times we have given.
I think that's in the data.
It's not, to me, it's not a clear cut. It's buried in the data with other things, and I want to separate it out, please.
Sure.
Thank you.
So functionally, explain to me how in one station we can work with 3 and the other one 4 with the same type of cardiac call. So just explain to me the dynamics of why 4, why 3, and why we should or shouldn't add people.
Well, what you're asking is on a specific type of call, a cardiac call.
Specifically.
If we recognize that either through dispatch or the way that's relayed to us as a cardiac call, they have the ability to ask for more help from the other station. So they get there, and for someone who's ill and it's a cardiac call, the crews on scene can ask for more help. If the dispatcher comes across and says it's a cardiac call, the officer on scene can automatically send additional personnel to that call. So we're not limited to just 3. The 3 comes more in effect to a general illness call where we just have, someone who's not feeling well, maybe they, broke their arm, something not as severe or serious, they can handle with 3 personnel, and they don't need to have, 4 or 5 or 6 people responding from the other station to fill that in. They can handle that with the 3. So cardiac calls are a little different because we can always ask for more help. And depending on the way it's dispatched to us, our crews can upgrade that call at the dispatch time or when they arrive on scene. They can always ask for more help.
So why do we have 4 at one station and 3 at the other?
Well, the way we have 4...
Is it a capacity of station? Is that, or?
No, as we were building staffing for that, because we manned the ladder truck out of Station 39, I don't feel safe to have the ladder truck respond with 3. So we have the ladder truck has the 4th, and then up here where we just have an engine, we have 3 for the engine when we're at minimum staffing.
So do we know how many times we've needed that 4th person to show up within 38? So we send 3, and we need additional help. So they come from 39, and then 39 needs more help. I mean, do we have an idea of what, because this has to do with adding personnel, I think, so.
Well, we've analyzed this as we've gone through the data, and as we've never had 2 stations before. So as we were building staffing, we increased staffing at the single station, and then when we opened up the 2nd station, then we divided staffing between 2 stations. As we have never done this before, we have tweaked our response times. So when we first responded from 2 stations, I gave up my vehicle and let the people from Station 39 use that as a response vehicle. So they were responding anytime we were at 3 at this station. Someone would come code 3 with the deputy's car and respond to that station. We were also putting all 3 of those people responding from the station in the medic unit. So typically what happened on those general calls where we only needed 2 people to transport, the crew member from the other station would drive the officer back to Station 38 and leave them off here before returning to Station 39. We started to notice a trend that was happening more than they were actually using those other people to transport. So what we did is we then took it back to Code 2 response, normal traffic. So they were not running emergency traffic. However, because they were still responding all the way to the other side of town, they were still bringing the officer back. Early last year when we got our new medic, it only holds 2 sets of gear in it because of the way it was designed in a different method. Only 2 sets of fire gear will fit on that, so we can't have the guy in the back not have his fire gear with him, so we changed our response out of this station to have 2 people respond in the medic unit. 1 person responds in our pickup truck or our utility vehicle, and he has his gear with him in his utility vehicle. If they get to the scene and they need 3 people to transport, he has the ability to lock that truck up on scene and transport with medic and then pick up the truck when they come back. Now, if they need more help, they can still call for more help to come over and attend that. But that traffic, when they call for more help, that'll be code 3 emergency traffic coming from the other station. So we've kind of changed the way we responded out of that. So now we'll have 3 people there, 2 people can transport, the officer comes back by himself, and I haven't disrupted the crew's integrity at the other station unnecessarily, just to give somebody a ride back to the station.
So was that the most recent change a month or so ago?
That happened in August.
Okay, August.
We were still continuing to do that up through August, where we were sending somebody code 2 over there, and they were canceling that person a majority of the time, and that's when we decided when they need help, they can call it, and we can send it emergent over.
How did we reach the decision to do that? What was the criteria when we said we were going to make this change in August?
We were looking at the number of times that we were getting that car canceled before it even arrived on scene. And that really became noticeable when we went to the response with the pickup truck and the medic responding, because now the officer did not need that ride back. So we were tracking the number of times that the car left this other station and didn't make it all the way to scene before they were canceled. So that's what drove the decision to make that change.
I would be interested in how many times, have we ever been forced to only have 3 people take the ladder truck out, and if so, how many times? The last couple of years, I don't expect you to answer tonight.
I'd have to research that.
Thank you.
Well, there's just a lot to digest here. I was wondering, can we ask the deputy chief to come back next month after we may have more questions next month?
He'll be here for budget, so we can, yeah, our plan was to keep the police and fire budget on next month's agenda as well, as questions came up, so.
So, and I understand what you're saying, when Joe Gray introduced this to us, we were swimming, and this has been narrowed down a little bit, so it's a little more, and we haven't seen it a second time, it's a little more understandable.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, appreciate this breakdown.
We have 2 questions to follow up on.
This really does.
thank you. So, appreciate being involved on both sides of this conversation, personally. However, and I think you know that we're somewhat limited as council members, but having worked in the school district a little bit, and I haven't even run this by the mayor, but I know there was a frequent gathering between union officials and the administration to continually talk about the things that were on each other's mind. And I don't know if that's occurring or not. You don't even have to answer that, but I just think open and transparent communication, even when it isn't necessarily what we want to hear, is always better. So that's my encouragement. So next month, though, I do hope we can maybe come back, we can digest this a little bit, and
And if there's questions that come up in the meantime, please email them to me, and I'll make sure I give them to Deputy Chief Granado or responses. And as soon as we have responses to these 2 questions, we'll send them out to the committee.
I know hard data doesn't lie. I know these are, these are definitely facts that Joe accumulated. But if there is any discrepancies in the narrative or anything from the firefighters, can that get passed on to us through you or whatever?
Sure.
I mean, in any way, get it to us. Just make sure that we have complete facts.
You know, I always think, what would we do in worst case scenario? Hypothetically, we have another fire like Social, and at the same time we get a major accident on 75. Where do we stand? And I'm thinking I don't like the answers.
I'm sure those kind of situations have been thought about and thought through. And it's funny, because I was wondering the same thing, but I'm assuming you develop scenarios similar to that.
You're gonna have to probably do mutual aid in that type of situation.
Absolutely. The city of Toledo, I've been in the city of Toledo both with the city of Perrysburg and Rossford in my career, because city of Toledo had to call for more help because they had major fire and a major accident going on at the same time. So so they can't handle all their calls. So, city of Sylvania has participated in their calls and part of their response as well. We plan for the best, but or plan for the worst, but hope for the best. If I staffed enough for every call scenario that we could have, the train derails in town and then we have a tanker explode on the highway, that's stuff that we are not prepared to do by ourselves. That is why we have mutual aid agreements, automatic aid agreements, where those other entities come and help us. As when they have their issues, we go and help them.
But on a single structure fire, you probably shouldn't have mutual aid, right? I have a feeling that we probably have.
I think you said we do.
We have automated.
We have automatic aid for structure fires. So when we're dispatched, they're dispatched at the same time.
That's probably like the information.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
So now we're on to the budget for 2023, police and fire. So next item on the agenda.
Let's see, so we have, I'll pick on Chief Jones. Here is, I think Amber has set this out, it was in one large document, but we broke out police and fire, so that's just police. And then also as part of the packet that Amber and Kayla sent out, you may recall seeing a sheet that talks about personnel calculation details. This was in an effort to have us / Amber explain that this year is the first year that departments, divisions did do their own personnel budgets. They provided the information to Amber and Kayla actually crunched all the numbers. She factored in any collective bargaining agreement increases for those employees. For non-union employees, there's a placeholder of 2%. She factored in Medicare, the police and fire as appropriately, pension contributions, medical, dental, optical, any deferred compensation. She collected the amount of overtime hours estimated per employee by department or division, in this case police. She crunched those numbers. And so in your detailed sheet, this is the first time you won't see a personnel number from the finance department. So this is all of the operational budget outside of personnel. The total budget that was emailed to you includes personnel and all the payroll roll-ups. But if we want to go through this document first, I'll let Chief Jones take us through this document. Amber then can point out the location in which you can find that other information. As we're going through our budgeting transition.
This document is this document?
Yes.
Okay. So, it has been mentioned, the account number is a little different this year. There's some things that have been combined, moved around. So, in order to do a one-to-one comparison from last year, it's going to be a little difficult to do, but I'll do my best with that. The registration is going to be for our police training. We've kind of divided that out into general police training, the leadership training that we have, and then the training that we contract with Owens for. So we have that. We also, in that training area is travel and meals. A lot of the training we do have is out of the area. Requires, overnight stays. So that's in there as well. And then our membership and dues is in that. Total travel registration dues and memberships. So training is something that is really important. So the amount is up about $5,000 from last year in this total in this area here. In the next section, the contract labor. That contract labor is going to be for the safety helpers. As I mentioned a few months ago, when we met, we've struck a deal with the school where the schools have taken over the personnel costs for crossing guards, and also will be providing the teachers for safety council. We are only going to be responsible for the helpers for that. So that's what the contract labor there is. The communication and technical services, basically this is going to be all the technical stuff, communications. So we have separate internet in there. Our cell phones come out of this. Our Alexa poll policy and annual training costs for the daily training bulletins come out of that. Investigator resources, ICP Net, which is a resource that we use, LexisNexis, our software for our forensics stuff, our performance management software, crash software, web check services, which is basically the web check services is people pay us, we pay the state, and then that money goes back in. So that's there's actually a revenue account that goes with the web check. The Phoenix licensing and maintenance there, that's for our CAD and record management system. Just a side note on that, we are working on a countywide CAD and record management system, and the sheriff's office is setting that up, but that is going to be paid for through state funding and also through ARPA funds through the county. So that's not going to be a cost being borne by us, at least for the first 5 years on that, once we lose that. So, but the one thing we've added in here is the PowerPhone EMD software. The EMD software will tie into our CAD system, and so when we get medical calls to come into our dispatchers, they're going to have standardized questions to ask, and we're going to be able to get that information and pass it on to the firefighters when they're responding to those calls. Then the one nice thing about the countywide CAD system is not only will we have access to it, firefighter paramedics will have access to that, so when they're responding to calls, they're going to be able to see those notes updated live on that. So there'll be some advantages to that. Some other things there, postage, that's been broken out separately. Prisoner housing on municipal charges, that's only if we charge somebody under a municipal code and house them in the county jail. 99.9% of the time, they're charged under a higher revised code, so that's picked up by the county, so we don't pay for those costs. Safety Town professional services, that's if we bring outside speakers in for Safety Town, if we need to bring a specialist in, and there's fees involved, then we have that involved with that. Property and liability insurance, that's the number that Amber gives us, and then she takes care of paying that. Janitorial services, the cost of the cleaning the building, 5 days a week, biohazard cleaning, so if we have someone that we arrest that gets sick, something like that, we have that we can come and do that. Just annual cleaning, the hallway floors, carpet cleaning, the rug maintenance, all of that. Building repairs and maintenance is going to be pest control, and then other maintenance and repairs that may come up throughout the year. The big stuff's going to go through the service, Department of Public Service budget, but the smaller stuff that comes up, we may have to pay for some of those things. Office equipment and repair, there's a couple things. There's an ice machine there that has to be cleaned every year, copier maintenance, and then we have some money in there, so if other equipment that we have, office equipment that needs repairs, we can get that taken care of. Vehicle and equipment repairs and maintenance. So this vehicle maintenance and repairs is going to be if we have to send something out for service to a dealership, something like that. So this is going to be on the service side of it. There'll be another part where we actually have these supplies. Then other services, we have maintenance for our fingerprint machines, our digital radio phone recording system, the alarm stuff, key card for all of the buildings, our mobile video interview, so that our body camera system, our in-car camera system, and the interview room system. There's annual software maintenance agreement on that. Our annual software or annual maintenance agreement with PNR communications for our radios, getting those preventive maintenance done every year. We had issues with it. They take care of those repairs, radar calibrations. We have an uninterrupted power supply in the building that we have to pay annual maintenance on. And then we have money in there in case anything else comes up in that. So that's going to be all the services component of it. And then the next is going to be the materials and supplies area. So office supplies we have in there. Equipment and furniture under 10,000. So one of the things that we're replacing almost yearly is chairs. The chairs that the officers use in the squad room, dispatch chairs that get used 24 hours a day. So those are things we have to take into account. Supplies for Safety Town and DARE. So we buy a lot of that stuff up front. And then we can't get reimbursed for that at the end. But so Safety Town supplies, DARE supplies. Fuel. For the last couple of years, I've been fortunate enough to let the fuel prices or the amount of fuel budget go down. This year, that's lucky. With gas prices hitting $5 at one point, not sure what goes on next year. That is up a little for 23. Vehicle and machinery supplies. So that's going to be supplies that our mechanics use. So they do most of the vehicle maintenance for us. So oil changes, tires, parts for the cars. If something goes down, all that comes out of that area. Uniform, clothing, and boots. That's per the collective bargaining agreement. Staff gets so much per year, whether it's the officers or the dispatchers and records. So that's in there. And then other supplies, materials, and cover basically everything else we're going to buy. So that could be firearms training supplies, ammunition, supplies for the fireworks, things like the tape, we need to tape off certain areas, flares for the roadway, direct traffic there, evidence processing supplies, dispatch headsets. Dispatchers have headsets that we're actually going to be upgrading so we'll be able to use both the radio and the phone with the one headset. We have a little bit of money in there for food for prisoners in case we do have someone there for a short term, if they're diabetic or they need something, we can give them that. We have money in there for Narcan, cleaning, disinfecting, sanitizing supplies, background expenses, recruitment, our Citizens Police Academy. One of the bigger ones in here is water barricades. When we had the great race in town, we really had to close off a lot of streets. And we've seen too much over the years of people just blowing through wooden barricades and hitting pedestrians and that. So we used water barricades then. Not going to totally stop something, but once you get the water in the barricades, they're about 350 pounds a piece. And so we want to order some of those so we have those on hand for the events that go on in the downtown area. We do have money in there for 3 new in-car computers. Money in there to in our evidence processing area. The countertop in there needs to be replaced and needs to be a stainless steel one. We need to get a new copier. We have 3 copiers in the building, so every couple years or so we're replacing those. Some radar units. We do have money in there for some bicycles, bike supplies. And then this is where ballistic vests come out of. We do get 50% back on those from the federal government. So we do get the grant money from that, but we have to pay for it up front. And then we have money in there for other police supplies and materials that may come up throughout the year. So that's going to be the general fund budget for it. And then in the capital, we had 3 cruisers in there for next year, 3 replacement cars, $180,000 for those. And then we also need to replace the refrigerator in our evidence room. That's actually a special refrigerator that's opens to both sides, locks. So the one we have is the original one we built the building in 04, and we've had a lot of issues with it. On a note on the vehicles, recently Ford has canceled a lot of orders. That affected us. Vehicles that we ordered in January or February of this year, 6 of them were canceled by Ford. Talking with the dealership, they actually had 400 total canceled that they sold, and Ford is raising the prices on them for next year. So that'll be something that we're going to have to talk about in another meeting and get council approval on some things. But so as we look at the amended budget, the amount that we have there, the $180,000 we have for 3 vehicles and equipment, could rise a little bit because what Ford is telling us now, the price of the vehicle is going up $9,000 each for vehicles. So, and then we're not the only ones dealing with this happening throughout the areas, happening across the country. So they took way too many orders and don't have the parts to complete the orders. So those are going to be the 2 big things in there. And then the last page there, the drug law, the DUI arrest, furtherance of justice, federal shared proceeds. So these are all fine and forfeiture accounts. The drug law account we use for doing investigations. We can use it for certain supplies and materials. The DUI account can only be used for enforcement activities for OVI offenses or for education involving OVI offenses. The furtherance of justice and the federal shared proceeds can be used for supplies, materials, and those types of things. So that money, is basically always in those accounts, and we just reappropriate each year based on what we spent last year and what has come in that time as well. And then just a comment on the, even though you don't have all the, I think over all the personnel costs in there, you mentioned that personnel, but one of the things we want to do next year is, currently right now we run 1 sergeant per shift. So with them working 4 days on, 2 days off, that means, every 6 days, 2 out of those days we don't have a sergeant working. So what we want to do is make sure we have a sergeant there at all times. So I don't plan on adding any additional personnel, but taking 3 of the patrol positions, promoting 3 patrol officers to sergeant. It doesn't short us on the road because we still have the same amount of patrol staff, but we then offset their schedule, so we always at least have 1 sergeant schedule per shift, so we have someone there rather than relying on an officer in charge, that we have the accountability to make sure that we always have a supervisor there. So that will be a big thing. And the other thing that was mentioned in the mayor's budget letter, one of the things, we had a vacant deputy chief's position, and what we're looking at doing with that is putting that position back in the mix. At this point, we would potentially be to promote from within, from the lieutenant's rank, and then leave that lieutenant's rank vacant for a short time, see if maybe they're in the amended budget, we can get a replacement for that person, or maybe we run with short lieutenant for a year. The other issue we run into is we're running out of space over there, so we really don't have a whole lot of places to sit people, and so that's one of the things. But the importance of that lieutenant or that deputy chief spot is to make sure we have a succession plan in place. We want to make sure that we're always promoting, making sure we have people ready to take over at some point down the road when I do finally set the call points.
In 20 years.
So that's kind of the quick overview of that.
Yeah. Go ahead. Oh, okay. The salaries and fringe benefits, I see like 364,000 together. The 312 and then 52.7. That is, what I mean is it's up from 22. I'm looking at this page here. Yeah, total salaries.
Yeah, that's it, Mark. That's the increase,
That's the increase.
from the 22 budget to the 23
Uh-huh.
budget. That is basically from the sheet I think Bridget passed out. For union members, it's a 2.5 increase.
Oh, is that what that's?
That is the main thing, and then benefits that are associated with that, and that includes pensions and, when you increase the wages, everything, all the benefits related to that
Okay.
increase as well.
So that's not for any additional?
No, we're not, there's no
Okay.
additional on that. And one thing that I will point out, that Kayla had reminded me to let you know too, so there is legislation, at the state level now that would increase the city's contribution to police and fire pension fund. So in the police and fire pension fund portion of the budget, they did anticipate that increase. If that happens, we're prepared for it. If it doesn't happen, we want it to be there anyways.
I believe they're changing percentages, is that what they're doing?
Yeah, so
Yeah, right now it's 19.5% for the city contribution, and it's expected to go up to 20.9
Yeah.
next year, and then gradual after that as
I
well.
had heard that
Chief, supplies and materials went up 131,000
right.
from last
And-
year. What, I know you went down the list here, but what, was there it was just a accumulation of many of those going up, or was it?
Well, what it is it's a combination of the way the accounts have been moved around,
Uh-huh.
and certain things have been moved from, for example, the stuff with the mechanics, that used to come out of a line that was more services, now it's in a line with supplies. So that's 30,000 right there, that we just moved from one to another. So, like I said, it's kind of hard to do that one-to-one comparison because the chart of accounts has changed and things are being put where they should be.
Okay. And on the capital improvements, maybe you know this, Bridget, last year we had 500,000 to do the upstairs, right?
In this year's budget, there was 1.5 million, 1.5 or 1.4. Can't remember, estimated for this budget year. And in discussions with the chief regarding that first of all, that 1.4 million or 5 million is probably more like 2 million now, given all the shortages and the cost of materials and labor. But that was prior to understanding that buys, if that builds out up there, that buys them about 5 years, I think the chief indicated. So we were looking to do any improvements over there more holistically with anything that might happen with a new municipal complex
Okay.
of some sort.
But that's still in the budget, the 1.2?
We now changed it to 1.2, and that would be both for municipal and police.
Okay.
Because you may recall in this year's budget, there was a separate line item for municipal, all about 1 million or 1.5, and there was 1.4 million in there for just the police renovations. We combined the two, and due to needing to balance the budget, we shaved that down to help balance that budget.
Yeah, and to answer your question further, I believe the 524,000 for capital that you're looking
That's
at,
the one
the
I'm
difference, yes. For 22, the budget for capital out of the general fund for police was 524,000. We do have a capital fund that now we're moving items to. Anything that's over $10,000, we're not going to take out of the general fund. For accounting purposes, we're going to take it out of the 403 fund, which is the capital fund. It wasn't really consistent previously, so that is one of our goals, to move that way. So it looks like they have no capital expenses for next year. However, that is coming out of the 403 fund, so not specifically the general fund. That's why it looks like zero. And you'll see that for most departments as well.
Well, the 403 has always been capital, though, so it's,
Correct. However, it hasn't always been used that way.
Okay. Now I see the 5.4.
A lot of times capital, especially for smaller amounts, was just taken out of the general fund. But now we do have a policy that anything over 10,000 will come out of that 403, just for easier tracking and comparisons and to see, what we're really purchasing.
or our capital.
Yes. Yep.
Never stumped you yet. You always
So
have
just to
very-
confirm, so there is no personnel change, there is some, we'll say patrol going to sergeant and lieutenant going to deputy,
Correct.
but then I heard you say that you may or may not fill that lieutenant's position.
Correct.
So there will be, so the net will be the same.
At this point, that would be the same.
Thank you.
Has it ever been broken down what our security officers cost? You know, the ones that are out here for this building, or is that just in your, just because they rotate in and out, you don't really keep track?
At one point, we had done some calculations on the hours that they were out there, but it's not broken out separately. It's part because they, you know, spend some time on the road during the day and then come in there and spend some time there.
Okay. I only ask that because I know it's been asked a few times what that's costing us as compared to if we went a different route with that.
Part of what you're already saying, right?
Correct.
What was the question? What did you say?
Common security officers.
Did I say that? Did I say security? I meant the detail that they're working.
Yeah.
I know the police.
Yeah.
Yeah, security, I'm just teasing you. No, my question was, they, I had known that they're not there the whole time. They, like.
Well, I know they rotate in and out.
Yeah.
I knew that. I just
Yeah.
wondered if you were still tracking, you know,
I'm sure you're.
the cost of it.
Yeah, I mean, the cost would, you know, typically it's about 9 hours a day.
So this has been, I know, and this has been asked and answered before. Why don't we have, you know, a non-police officer there? But I understand that it has to be a peace officer.
Right, and you know, I had that conversation before.
Yes, so I get that.
Your safety and security is priceless.
That's right. I'm not questioning that. I was just curious about it.
You wanted to make sure you felt that way.
Boy, no, let's
Absolutely,
say
all three, everyone is for,
thank you.
even the firefighters.
Think he means that? Okay, that's all the questions I have.
So thank you for that. Yeah, we will probably have further conversation once we get this understood.
And if there's any questions that come up, also feel free to reach out to Amber since we're going through that whole account number shifts, new account numbers, repositioning things. It's been a learning curve for all of us, and it continues to be. And then next up we have Fire. Deputy Chief Renata is here, and then I have the detail sheets that were also sent out, but for ease of following.
These are great. Is this because of the new software and that we have these?
No, not yet. It's still gonna change again next year.
Is it really?
Sorry.
These are still,
It's only gonna get better.
these are improving.
These are just
It's not
expensive.
improvement from last year, so it really helps us out a lot. Thank you.
Great. Yes, sir.
All right, as we go through ours, we don't have a whole lot of changes to ours. Our significant changes that you'll see with ours are, like Chief Jones says, due to accountability and change of accounts, so how things are listed. So that's the biggest difference that you'll see here. So in our first line item here with our registration training, we kept this in the budget and increased our training. The last couple of years, we have increased some specialized training with rope rescue, confined space, and with an emphasis on the river this year, we're doing swiftwater rescue training. We've already begun purchase some of those pieces and parts to do that training, and we'll continue that next year and actually have the training for the swiftwater rescue class. As we move down, next item is utilities. Again, increased costs there. You will see that, you know, that's still one of the higher expenses that we have. Through this budget process, again, our communication and technical services, we had to reach out in several different categories and pull everything into this category. So most of this is our software, which we had distributed through some other different accounts. We brought it all together and gave us better accountability through this new process. And you'll see that here, our communications services. Postage is minimal. Our ambulance billing services based on our number of calls and collections that they send out. Property and liability insurance is given to us from finance. Buildings, repairs, and maintenance. Again, this category has changed. again, what's parts and what's service. So we separated those things out as well. So some of these will be changing in the amounts over year to year. But again, these will be the services that we have under building maintenance and repairs. Same goes with vehicle equipment repairs. They come out of two separate accounts that we had before. We had them all in one, and we were buying parts and paying for service out of the same account. So we're still struggling through that process to see what percentage that is going to be for parts, what percentage that is going to be for actual service. So this is our breakdown as we do that for some of our required service, our preventive maintenance testing, and our required ladder and equipment testing. We get down to the next section, our accreditation service cost. We are moving forward with our accreditation. We've had the other divisions in the city have been doing diligently their homework that we've sent out to them with our anticipation of moving forward towards the accreditation. And the money you see allotted for here is our cost for the CPSE to come in. We have to pay their expenses for the people that come in and do the evaluation. They are not compensated, but we do cover their wages for their meals and hotels while they're here. Office supplies is stayed relatively the same.
Where's the number for accreditation? I see 16,000, that's radio purchase and maintenance? There's no number on accreditation?
I thought that's what 16,000 was.
Oh, am I looking at the wrong place then? I look straight across.
It's under other
The
services.
straight across is the old account.
Oh, I see. Okay, so accreditation is the only thing that's under other services?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I looked straight across in 16, I saw radio purchase and maintenance.
That's the account number that used to be used in the past for radio purchases and maintenance, which is now, and Amber would have to explain this because that's where it gets crazy. We had like so many people using the same account numbers, but they were labeled different things.
Okay.
So she's kind of herded everybody back into using
Trying to be
one.
consistent.
Try to be consistent.
It's all right. Okay, thank you, I'm sorry.
No, that's
I
fine.
got confusion, yes, I get it now.
And then the last thing we have, along with the police department, we were supposed to receive a vehicle this year to replace the chief's vehicle. That has also been canceled. So that'll move forward to the next budget process to see what we can do about getting that vehicle to move forward.
Oh, I see it. 149,000? Amber, that was a capital outlay?
Yes, for 22 was the budget, and then next year, anything over 10,000 will go out of that 403 fund, so you won't see it
Okay.
in the general.
But you did have 149, that was for more than one vehicle?
There's a couple of other things that combined to that.
There was, yeah.
Oh,
A couple other capital things that went into it.
because then that's taken, all right, I understand.
And I will note that one of these sheets that was sent out with the budget packet is the 2023 budget reductions. And I know Councilman Weber, you had that earlier.
Yes.
But you'll note there at the very bottom of this list, there's probably 7 or 8 items that are related to the fire department. Again, our hopes and dreams are that when we are going through the amended budget process, all, if not most of these items will show up in that. But again, this was one of our budget balancing measures for this year.
Do you have 3 of those?
I do have additional.
Okay.
Pass those down.
Sure.
Thank you. So personnel-wise, 0 changes? Is that,
That's correct.
you didn't address that particular thing, 826? Okay. Just want to make sure.
But if it's determined they could use another increase in personnel, maybe one staff member, how do we about that, we gotta look at the amended, if we decide that, right?
If the mayor proposes that, yes. Then again, we'll have this item on the agenda, we're assuming for your November meeting for additional conversation.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
You get a lot more information to absorb. And review. Any comments or questions?
Just, have we got back from the auditors? I imagine, and this is probably a question. I know we've probably put together what we feel our projected income or revenue will be, right? And what stage of the process are we in? Have we sent it to the audit, to the county?
Yes, it has gone to the county. We should have a certificate soon for next year.
Have they adjusted, the recommended adjustments?
I have not heard anything, and I don't know that they usually do either.
They probably usually make sure it's just correct with everything you've given them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. That should be coming soon.
And I imagine it's much more reliable than how we do it for the church person.
We will see.
Hopefully. Thank you.
Is there any other business?
No, I have nothing.
All right.
No service tomorrow.
So
I will not be at either committee meeting tomorrow. I don't think that I'm actually critical to any of these conversations, but if you have any questions,
Nothing I have, okay, thanks.
email me before the meetings tomorrow, please.
You make us feel more secure as well.
Well, I appreciate that, but
Maybe not as secure as the police chief.
they can only be a taser, so definitely go with him.
All right, so we will call this safety committee meeting adjourned.
Thank you.